the strongest marriages aren't always the ones with the most passion. Sometimes they're the ones where two people have figured out what actually matters. And right now, millions of couples are living in what experts call sexless marriages. And the psychology behind why they stay is far more complex and fascinating than you might think. Welcome to Dud Psychology. Before we start, I need to ask you a favor. If this topic resonates with you, if you've ever wondered about this yourself, or if you know someone navigating this situation, hit that like button right now, because what I'm about to share will completely change how you understand intimacy, commitment, and what it really means to choose someone every single day. There's something at the end of this video I need to share with you about what's really at stake when we talk about sexless marriages. Something about identity, about connection, about the difference between existing together and truly living together. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you thought about what holds a relationship together? Really holds it together? Because I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. It's rarely what we think it is. And if you've ever felt that strange knot in your stomach when this topic comes up, that uncomfortable tension between what society tells you a marriage should look like and what yours actually feels like, you're not alone. That sensation, that quiet discomfort, is exactly what we need to talk about today. Here's the thing. Everyone else has what looks like a perfect relationship on Instagram. But behind the curated photos, most couples are navigating their own challenges. Maybe it's different challenges than yours, but trust me, no one has it all figured out. Studies show that in long-term marriages, sexual frequency naturally decreases. That's normal. The question isn't whether it will change, but whether the change works for both of you. And here's what's fascinating. While millions of people are desperately trying to fix their sexless marriages, reading articles, trying scheduled intimacy, feeling like failures, there's a growing number of couples doing something completely different. They're making peace with it. They're choosing to stay, not despite the lack of sex, but having consciously decided it doesn't define their relationship. Over the years working with couples, I've seen this situation generate two completely opposite reactions from people. Some hear sexless marriage and immediately think, that's a failed marriage. They need to leave. They're settling. They're giving up on happiness. Others hear it and think, there's more to marriage than sex. Maybe they've figured out something deeper. Maybe they're more evolved than the rest of us. But the reality is much more complex and fascinating than either of these perspectives. Because behind the decision to stay in a sexless marriage, there's an entire psychology that tells us about how our brains work, our emotions, our deepest fears, and also, believe me, our capacity for conscious choice and unexpected forms of love. Before you keep listening, I need to tell you something important. This isn't about judging whether it's right or wrong to stay in a sexless marriage. This is about understanding what's happening in your mind and heart when you make that choice, or when you're struggling with it. Let me tell you something I've observed working with couples of all ages and backgrounds. The biggest challenge facing modern relationships isn't lack of passion. It's that nobody taught us how to navigate the inevitable changes that come with long-term commitment. Nobody explained that desire ebbs and flows, that bodies change, that trauma, medication, stress, childbirth, aging, all fundamentally alter our relationship with physical intimacy. Nobody explained to us that the oxytocin rush of early romance, that chemical high that made you want to tear each other's clothes off, was never designed to last forever. Your brain literally can't maintain that level of intensity indefinitely. And here's what concerns me most. There's something we need to address by the end of this video. Something about the difference between choosing a sexless marriage from a place of conscious acceptance versus staying from a place of fear, resignation, or unspoken resentment. because those two situations look identical from the outside, but feel completely different on the inside. Let's start with the basics, with what actually constitutes a sexless marriage. Researchers typically define it as a marriage where couples have sex fewer than 10 times per year. But even that definition misses something crucial, because this isn't just about counting encounters. This is about connection, desire, and what intimacy actually means in a long-term partnership. Let me explain what's happening neurologically when physical intimacy disappears from a relationship. Your brain is wired for connection. When you engage in physical intimacy with a partner, your brain releases a cocktail of chemicals: dopamine, the neurotransmitter of pleasure and reward; oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone; and endorphins, your body's natural pain relievers and mood elevators. This is the same dopamine system that activates when you eat delicious food, accomplish a goal, or, yes, use addictive substances. Your brain doesn't really distinguish between different sources of reward. It just knows, this feels good, do it again. But here's where it gets interesting. Humans are social animals. We're designed to belong, to bond, to connect. For thousands of years, being part of a pair bond, being chosen by someone and choosing them back, was fundamental to survival. Literally. A partner meant protection, resources, shared labor, someone to have your back in a dangerous world. Our brains developed very powerful mechanisms to seek and maintain these bonds. Physical intimacy became one of the primary ways we reinforce pair bonding. It's not just about reproduction. It's about repeatedly telling each other's nervous systems, "You're safe with me. We're a team. I choose you." So when that physical connection stops, something fundamental shifts in the relationship's neurochemistry. You're no longer getting those regular oxytocin boosts that reinforce bonding. You're no longer having those moments of vulnerability and connection that reset your stress response systems. And here's where people split into different categories in how they respond to this shift. Some couples find other ways to bond: intellectual partnership, shared purpose, deep friendship, co-parenting, mutual support. Their connection doesn't depend primarily on physical intimacy. These individuals have strong internal validation. Their self-worth isn't tied to being sexually desired. They can say, "This works for us." The absence of sex doesn't mean absence of love. But it could also be that someone is staying in a sexless marriage because they're afraid. Fear of being alone. Fear that they're too old to start over. Fear that no one else would want them. Fear of the financial devastation of divorce. Fear of hurting their children. Fear of admitting failure. And here's where things get complicated, because staying from a place of conscious choice is fundamentally different from staying from a place of fear. The behavior looks the same from the outside, someone staying in a marriage without sex, but the internal experience is completely different. Some people genuinely feel their life isn't diminished by the lack of physical intimacy. They have fulfilling friendships, meaningful work, strong bonds with family. The marriage provides companionship, and that's enough. They've rejected the narrative that you must have a particular kind of relationship to be happy. But there's a third category, and this one is particularly interesting. People who stay in sexless marriages, not because they don't want sex, but because they want this person more than they want sex. They've done the math. They've weighed what they'd gain by leaving against what they'd lose. And they've decided that the total package of this relationship, this history, this person is worth more than sexual fulfillment. Research on long-term relationship satisfaction shows that couples who maintain strong emotional intimacy, effective communication, shared values, and mutual respect report high levels of satisfaction even when sexual frequency decreases significantly. The sex isn't irrelevant, but it's not the foundation. It's one element among many. But be careful, because it's not as simple as saying love conquers all, or sex doesn't matter if you have connection. There's something deeper here that has to do with intention, with honesty, with whether both partners have made peace with the situation, or whether one is quietly suffering while the other is oblivious. And that's what really makes the difference. And that's what we're going to talk about now. Let me explain what happens psychologically when you're in a sexless marriage, particularly when it wasn't a mutual decision. Your brain enters what I call a state of relational dissonance. You're experiencing a fundamental mismatch between what you expected from marriage and what you're actually living, between the image of partnership you held and the reality you wake up to every day. Because what you're seeing around you, in media, in conversations with friends, even in therapy culture, is a message that sex is essential to a healthy marriage. That if you're not having regular physical intimacy, something is deeply wrong. Your brain absorbs these messages and then compares them to your lived experience. But your brain doesn't have the full context. It doesn't know that your partner is dealing with trauma from their past. It doesn't factor in the medications that kill libido. It doesn't account for the chronic pain, the hormonal changes, the exhaustion from caring for aging parents while raising kids, while maintaining careers. Your brain just knows there's a gap between expectation and reality. And that gap creates stress. This is where cortisol, your stress hormone, enters the picture. When you're lying awake at night feeling rejected, unwanted, confused about why your partner doesn't desire you anymore, your body releases cortisol. The same hormone it would release if you were facing a physical threat. Chronic elevated cortisol doesn't just make you feel bad emotionally. It disrupts sleep, weakens your immune system, increases inflammation, contributes to weight gain, accelerates aging. Your body is literally treating the absence of physical intimacy as a threat to your well-being. And here's where the cycle begins. First, you notice the lack of intimacy. Then, you start to take it personally. They don't find me attractive anymore. I've let myself go. I'm not desirable. Then, you become resentful. I have needs. This isn't fair. I didn't sign up for this. Then, you withdraw emotionally to protect yourself. If they won't be intimate with me, I won't be vulnerable with them. Finally, the emotional distance makes physical intimacy even less likely, and the cycle repeats. Over and over and over. I've observed couples where this cycle has run for years. By the time they seek help, they're not even sure they like each other anymore. The absence of sex became absence of affection, which became absence of kindness, which became absence of friendship. One couple described their home as a museum of their former relationship. Everything looked normal, but inside, they were profoundly lonely, living parallel lives under the same roof. Our generation is facing something unique. We're the first generation told that we deserve to have it all in our relationships. Passionate sex, deep friendship, intellectual stimulation, financial partnership, co-parenting excellence, emotional support, and personal growth. Previous generations had different expectations. Marriage was often about security, social standing, raising children, economic partnership. We're guinea pigs in a massive social experiment. And nobody warned us that trying to get all your needs met by one person might be setting yourself up for perpetual disappointment. The most dangerous part of staying in a sexless marriage, particularly when it's not a mutual choice, is what happens to your sense of self. You start questioning your worth. You start wondering if you're still attractive, still desirable, still worthy of passion and desire. You might stay because you're a good person who honors commitments. You might stay because leaving feels selfish. You might stay because you're terrified of being alone at 45 or 55 or 65. You might stay because you love your life. Just not this part of it. But here's what happens. Every time you have a birthday, Every time you see couples who seem passionate, every time you feel that pull of attraction towards someone else, you're reminded of what you're missing. And slowly, quietly, you start to resent not just your partner, but yourself for staying. Another dynamic I've observed, some people in sexless marriages start pouring all their energy and passion into other things. Work becomes consuming, hobbies become obsessive, friendships become primary. They're not having an affair, but they're having an emotional affair with their own life outside the marriage. And sometimes this works. Sometimes creating a rich, fulfilling life that doesn't depend on your partner for everything is actually the key to contentment. You're not waiting for them to complete you or fulfill you. You're complete on your own, and the marriage is just one part of a multifaceted life. But other times, it's just avoidance. You're not dealing with the fundamental question, is this actually okay with me? Or am I just tolerating it because I'm afraid to face the alternative? Studies on marital satisfaction show that couples in sexless marriages report significantly higher levels of loneliness, even when compared to single people. Because being alone when you chose to be alone is different from being lonely while lying next to someone who's supposed to be your partner. But the costs go beyond loneliness. There's the loss of physical affection, those small moments of connection that release oxytocin and reduce stress. There's the loss of feeling desired, which is different from being loved. There's the loss of that unique form of communication that happens through physical intimacy. There's the loss of playfulness, spontaneity, the ability to surprise each other. And there's time. Every year you stay in a situation that's not fully satisfying is a year of your precious, finite life. So what do we do about this? How do we know if we're staying from strength or from fear? How do we navigate this impossible decision? Let me share something I've observed working with couples. Consider someone, married 16 years, 2 teenagers, successful career. From the outside, everything looks perfect. But they describe feeling like they're fading, becoming a ghost of themselves. 7 years without physical intimacy. They tried everything, initiating, planning getaways, talking about it. Their partner would promise to work on it, but nothing changed. Eventually, they stopped trying because the rejection was too painful. They described feeling invisible. Then one day, a stranger smiled at them, and they felt something they hadn't felt in years. Seen, desired, real. That's when they knew they had a decision to make. For months they struggled. They loved their life together, were best friends in every way except this one. But they were terrified of waking up at 60 realizing they'd spent 20 years sexually invisible. Finally, they gave an ultimatum: couples therapy or I'm leaving. The first months were brutal. But about 6 months in, something shifted. They started touching again, not sexually at first, just holding hands, sitting close. The tension between them dissolved. 2 years later, they're different. Physical intimacy returned, though it looks different. More intentional, more honest. They told me, I'm glad I didn't leave. But I'm more glad I was willing to. That willingness to risk everything, that's what changed everything. So what can we learn? First, staying can work, but only with honest communication. Second, change requires both people doing uncomfortable work. Third, sometimes the threat of loss creates movement. Let me give you specific strategies you can start today. The good news is you have agency. You can make conscious choices, but it requires honesty and specific strategies. First, develop ruthless honesty with yourself. Ask, am I okay with this long term, or waiting for it to magically change? Write honest answers. Can you imagine 20 more years like this? Are you staying because you want to, or because you're afraid? Second, establish clear communication. Set weekly check-ins. 30 minutes to be honest about how you're feeling. Not blaming, just sharing. Third, decide what you're willing to do. Couples therapy, medical intervention, scheduled intimacy. What are you willing to accept? Fourth, understand why you want physical intimacy. Because society says you should? Because you feel rejected? Because you genuinely miss that connection? Understanding your motivations helps. Fifth, see the full picture. List everything your partner brings to your life. Then list what's missing. Look at both honestly. What matters is conscious choice, not drifting along hoping it gets better. Daily practice. Acknowledge one thing you appreciate about your partner each day. When frustrated, pause and ask what you need. End your day with physical touch, even a hug. All long-term relationships require conscious effort. The ones that look effortless are usually where both people work hardest behind the scenes. What if nothing changes? If you've genuinely tried, been vulnerable, given it time, and nothing shifts, you have information. You can decide if that choice still serves you. Find support. A therapist specializing in relationships. Trusted friends. Support groups. Connection with others who understand can be healing. This isn't about perfection. There will be setbacks. What matters is the overall direction. But let me tell you something that goes even deeper than all these strategies. I worked with someone recently who had a health scare. They thought they might have something serious, and in those weeks of waiting for test results, they told me when I thought about what I'd regret if I was dying, it wasn't that I didn't have enough sex. It was that I'd spent so many years feeling resentful and not really living. I'd let my marriage become this thing I endured instead of something I consciously chose every day. You don't need a health scare to realize this. You can realize it right now. When you're at the end of your life looking back, what will matter? Will it be that you had the perfect amount of physical intimacy? Or will it be that you lived authentically, that you made conscious choices, that you were honest with yourself and your partner about what you needed and what you could give? Will it be the number of times you had sex, or the quality of connection you maintained, the passion you felt in your 20s, or the deep partnership you built over decades? The image of what your marriage was supposed to look like, or the reality of what it actually became? You can decide right now that your life is yours to consciously create, that your marriage is something you choose every single day, not something you're trapped in, that your worth isn't dependent on being sexually desired, but on how you show up for yourself and the people you love. The people who successfully navigate sexless marriages, whether they ultimately stay or leave, have one thing in common: they made a conscious choice. They didn't just drift along. They didn't avoid the difficult questions. They looked honestly at their situation and decided what they could live with and what they couldn't. And here's the deepest truth of all. The most fulfilling marriage isn't necessarily the one with the most passion or the most sex. It's the one where both people feel seen, valued, and free to be themselves, where they're choosing each other from a place of abundance, not desperation, where they're honest about what they need and what they can give. When you can look at your partner and yourself with that kind of clarity and honesty, the question of whether to stay or go becomes clearer. Not easy, but clearer. So I invite you to do some deep reflection on your situation, not from judgment, not from guilt, not from fear, but from a place of genuine self-love and respect for your own needs and your partner's needs. Ask yourself, am I being true to myself in this marriage? Am I staying from strength or from fear? Am I happy with my choice, or am I just avoiding making one? Do I feel seen and valued, or invisible and tolerated? Is this the marriage I want, or just the one I'm willing to settle for? After answering these questions with total honesty, make whatever decision you need to make. Maybe that's staying and working on things. Maybe that's staying and accepting things as they are. Maybe that's leaving. Maybe that's opening up the relationship. Maybe that's redefining what intimacy means for you both. Whatever you decide, let it be your decision. Not what your parents would want. Not what your friends think you should do. Not what society says is right. Your decision, based on your needs and your values and your vision for your life. Because ultimately, all we have is this one life, here and now. Every year you spend in a situation that doesn't honor who you are is a year you don't get back. It's a year of your precious, unique, irreplaceable life. And I want to leave you with this. You are worthy of love exactly as you are. You're worthy of desire, of passion, of connection, of all the forms of intimacy that make you feel alive. You're also worthy of choosing a different kind of partnership if that's what you want. You're worthy of security and companionship and deep friendship, even without sexual passion. There's no one right answer here. The right answer is the one that lets you be fully yourself, fully alive, fully present in your own life. When you truly internalize this, when you feel it deep in your being, the decision about your sexless marriage will become clearer. Not because there's an obvious right answer, but because you'll know what you need to be okay. Now, if this video has resonated with you, if something I've shared has made you think differently about your situation, or given you clarity, or even just made you feel less alone, I'm going to ask you to do something very important. First, subscribe to this channel, because we're going to keep talking about these topics that truly matter. The messy, complicated, difficult parts of relationships and mental health that most people don't want to address. The conversations that might make you uncomfortable, but that you desperately need to have. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss upcoming videos. Second, give this video a like, but don't do it automatically. Do it consciously. Do it if you feel like this conversation was valuable, if you learned something or gained a new perspective. If you believe this message needs to reach other people who are struggling with the same questions, because every like helps this content reach someone who might be lying awake right now, wondering if they're crazy for staying or selfish for wanting to leave. Someone who needs to hear that they're not alone and that there are ways forward. And third, and this might be most important, leave me a comment. Tell me what you think. Are you someone who's in a sexless marriage? Someone who's considering staying or leaving? Someone who successfully navigated this situation? What's your relationship with physical intimacy in long-term partnerships? Creating a space where we can honestly discuss these topics without judgment is so important. You're not alone in this. We're all figuring out how to do relationships in a world that's constantly changing what it means to be partnered. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them. It could be a friend who's mentioned struggling with intimacy in their marriage. It could be a family member who seems stuck. It could be someone building the courage to make a difficult decision. Sharing this message is a way of saying, I see you. I care about you. You're not alone. And sometimes that's exactly what someone needs to hear. Remember that navigating a sexless marriage, whether you ultimately stay or leave, isn't something that resolves overnight. It's a process. There will be moments of clarity and moments of confusion. What's important is that you're being honest with yourself and making conscious choices. And above all, be patient and compassionate with yourself on this journey. You're dealing with one of the most complex aspects of human relationships. You're trying to honor both your needs and your commitments. You're trying to be true to yourself while also being fair to your partner. That's incredibly difficult, and you deserve credit for even being willing to look at it honestly. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring these topics that truly matter for your mental health and relationships. In the meantime, take care of yourself, be kind to yourself, and remember, Your life is yours to consciously create. Live it with intention, authenticity, and the courage to make the choices that honor who you really are. Until next time.